5, 4, 3, 2, 1. KenCast.
Hey everyone, happy Saturday. It's great to see you. I'm Ken Cole and welcome to KenCast. We've got a great show for you today. Kind of by popular cultural demand, there seems to be this cultural obsession with the 80s. And today we're going to try to figure out why. Why are the 80s so popular? Why are people so obsessed with the 80s, both in their everyday references to pop culture, to TV and movies? And so today I'm very happy to bring to you the perfect person to talk about this. You've seen him before. You've probably listened to his Last Row podcast. Please welcome Drew Rohaly. Drew, how are you?
Good, Ken. You are too kind, man. It's good to be back. It's always a pleasure to be part of the KenCast. It's an honor, and it's great to be here with you and the audience. I'm excited for this conversation today.
Well, I am just so excited that you're here too. I always love talking with you. And today we've got a doozy for you, Drew. Like, if everyone doesn't know, you are co-host of the Last Row podcast. You focus on analyzing movies in a really fun way. But a lot of these movies tend to be from like the 80s and the 90s. And so I think you're the perfect person to ask and to talk with us as we kind of explore why are the 80s so amazing? And so for everyone who doesn't know the Last Row podcast, could you give them kind of a quick overview?
Sure. Yeah, we do a lot of movies, like Ken mentioned, some in the 80s and 90s, and we try to take a fun little stab at them. It's not necessarily just a plot recap, so we do touch on some of that, but we try to dive into some of the world of the characters, and we talk a lot about the villains and some of the cheesiness and some of the things that you'll hear about today, but we try to find out, what's going on behind the scenes with some of these characters and in the world of the movies. So we've done a lot of 80s, 90s movies. Check out our website, thelastrowpodcast.com. You can check out our whole back catalog. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you download your podcast. Check it out and definitely let us know what you think.
Absolutely. And we've got a link to all that in the description. So everyone definitely check that out. Just want to take a second and say hi to everyone who's joined us today. Ben, good to see you, Ben. Can't wait. The 80s were the best era ever. Best era ever. Very cool. Robana, hi. Good to see you. Celine, I hope I'm saying that right. Hello. Good to see you. Stuart Young. Hey, Ken and Drew.
Hey, Stuart.
Terry Johnson. Hello, everyone. Hello, Terry. Hey, Robana. Wild Man Beyond. Great to see you. Hello. And Stuart says the era before political ideology began to creep into entertainment. Ooh, that's interesting. That's kind of an interesting point. Okay, so we are about to launch into the SEMA. Good to see you. Hello. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to all of your comments as we talk about this subject, because your ideas will maybe help inform our ideas and what we think about the 80s. So before we jump into our discussion, as always, let's get to news.
KenCast News.
Okay. Drew, here we
Never
go.
gets old.
No, it's fun. The news never gets old, right? We have a little bit of news, not as much as we would like. We know that for Cobra Kai fans, there's going to be a ton of marketing, a ton of information coming soon, and we don't have any of that yet, but there are a few things. You and I we know Peter. Oh, let me get, I see him.
Hey, Peter.
Hey, how's it going, Peter? Peter, we were just talking about you. Hi, Ken. Ask Drew why he didn't remember the
I'm
song.
never going to live this one down, by the way. Uh-oh. I'm never going to live this one down.
That's great. Well, Peter, this is a great segue because we are talking about the Cobra Kai Companion podcast has a Facebook group. You should listen to the podcast, but there's a Facebook group, and every day we're kind of doing this rewatch of the Cobra Kai series in the lead up to season 5. So definitely join the group and check out if you're not already part of the group. But okay, during Cobra Kai Wisdom, Mike's rewatch, Hayden Schlossberg showed up, and they were talking about when is this trailer going to show up. Okay. And this is what he said, Drew and everyone else. Hayden said, I would assume the trailer would come out a few weeks before the release date, like it usually does. The thing about Hayden, he's a genius. He's part of the geniuses that have come up with the Cobra Kai show. He is a wonderful. He has a wonderful sense of humor. He's a great tease, and so he's this is tongue firmly in cheek. He also says, "Glad you hit that ball. I think things will start getting active mid-August, give or take." So Drew, what are your thoughts here listening to this?
I'm surprised. I mean, in general, I guess I'm surprised that we haven't seen more, but I don't know if Netflix is trying to promote some of the other stuff and whatnot. And I think like Sandman just came out. I think it was on Friday, but I'm hoping that this means that we're going to start to see some more stuff because we've seen some images, we've seen some things there. We saw some teaser type stuff, but it's getting really close. I mean, we're like a month out essentially, and it's kind of crazy to think that it's actually almost this soon. So I'm hoping that what Hayden said is true, right? A couple weeks before, maybe another week or so. I wish it was out right now because I'd love to watch it. So, but like I guess a few weeks is maybe like 3+. I think, yeah, like Peter said in the chat here. So. Yeah, I would say that that's pretty deliberate from my perspective, but I just love that Hayden drops in here. I mean, it's awesome for him to interact with the fans. So, that's such a cool thing and just much appreciated. It's a great community for this, and I think he's awesome. So I'm glad that he's dropping some hints here.
Right, exactly. Wild Man says, I can't wait. Either way, it'll be awesome. 5 weeks marketing should start next week. And then Peter says, but it's also Hayden. So yeah, Hayden has a great sense of humor. Sometimes he teases, sometimes he misleads, but he is always entertaining and he comes up with great stuff. So he has occasionally joined us on KenCast for a few comments. So that you're right, Drew. He's just really, it's amazing how these showrunners are very accessible to the fans, and you just don't know where they'll pop up next. So I agree. Maybe a few weeks out. Maybe we're not that far away from a trailer, and I assume the floodgates will open. So we will see what happens next. Our next bit of news. Okay, so I don't know if everyone can see this tweet. This was from today, and this is the actress Alicia Hannah Kim, and she is going to play the sensei Kim Da-eun. Okay. Who may or may not be related to Sensei Kim Sung-young, who is mentioned in Karate Kid 3 and then also Cobra Kai Season 3. So Mark Kerr, who is Let's Be Water, he is one of the absolute great graphic designers, and he makes all this amazing Cobra Kai stuff. And he tweeted this new poster, amazing poster, and everyone should follow him if you're not.
Incredible. Just
incredible. Look at that. It makes me so excited. It's like he is doing Netflix's marketing for Netflix. It's really, really incredible.
They should be paying him. I hope they are, Mark. I hope they send you some checks here.
Yeah, I think Mark should be getting some kind of salary or perks or something. He's doing just amazing work spreading the love of Cobra Kai around the world. So he tweets this out, and then Alicia retweets this and says, "You have no idea, mwahaha." And she's reacting to this 5 weeks until all hell breaks loose. Okay, so Drew, here are my thoughts, and then I want to get your thoughts. It seems to me, number one, huge crazy stuff's going to happen in season 5. Okay, and the fact that she's teasing this, I think, could point to the fact that Sensei Kim Da-eun could have a big part in the craziness that happens.
I think you're right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Tell me what you think, because we've talked about this Terry Silver, Kim Sung-young, Kim Da-eun thing in the history of Cobra Kai. What do you think could happen?
I mean, we don't have a ton of backstory on Kim Sung-young other than a few lines here or there, and it's been speculated over the years. So what's cool, and like you said, nothing is sort of coincidental in this universe. I feel like there's absolutely a reason why she's involved. In some of the promo pics that we broke down, I think a few KenCasts ago, I think it was you, myself, and Peter, and some other folks, but we saw some really ominous shots of the sensei there with Terry, and I think that she's going to have a big part. And it's kind of exciting to see some new characters coming in that also may be as menacing or terrifying as Terry himself, which is cool. He's building out his own little army of senseis and people within the Cobra Kai dojo system. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen. And the fact that, especially the way Mark wrote, like, all hell breaks loose, and she says, "You have no idea." It means that it's going to be really epic, and I just can't wait. I'm like torn on it, right? Because everyone keeps saying, like, we want to see the trailer, And I remember some things, like when I watched the newest Batman movie, I sort of avoided the trailer, and it's like I can't avoid the trailer here because I need to see it because we have to analyze it. But at the same time, it's like I kind of don't want to see it because I want to be surprised. But I'm gonna cave. I'm definitely gonna watch it. It's gonna be so good.
I know that is the hard part about, like, talking about this and covering this, is because sometimes you just don't want to see anything. You just want to go in fresh. But yeah, I agree with you. This is going to be absolutely crazy. Wildman says, I have a feeling Kim will face Julie Pierce in later seasons from the next Karate Kid, which, I mean, that's a crazy idea too, isn't it, Drew?
Yeah, it would be cool. I'm curious if Hilary Swank will come back even in some capacity. Like Elizabeth Shue came for a little bit. It would be cool. I know, Hilary's an accomplished actress, so it would be cool to get her in the show, even if that movie wasn't as well received by like the critics and really the general community. But it would be cool to build out the universe a little further too. It'd be kind of fun.
Oh, 100%. Josh, good to see you, Josh. Terry Silver with shoulder pads. 80s never dies.
You gotta have that double-breasted suit too. I hope you bust one of those out too.
100%. 100%. Okay, next bit of news. Okay, so Tornado Chasers, guys, is my series that's being released on Reed Timmer's channel. If you're interested in storm chasing and tornadoes and everything, go check that out. He is releasing one new episode per week. The next episode is coming out tomorrow on Sunday. Check out the description and follow Reed Timmer's channel. Cobra Cole, guys, if you're waiting for Cobra Kai season 5, the perfect way to get ready is to watch Cobra Cole. We rewatched episode 4 in season 1 with Tom Cole. Just an amazing character. David Chatraw is an amazing actor, and this was so much fun to put together. And this answers your questions to whether Ken Cole could be related to Tom Cole, and if everyone might just know Terry Silver. So everyone check out Cobra Cole if you haven't seen it. Links in the description.
I'm hoping for a sequel, by the way. I can't wait for the sequel.
Oh, that
One day.
That would be amazing. That would be fun. So let us know if you want a sequel and spread the love. Share Cobra Cole with everyone you love. Okay. Let's see what else is going on. Peter says, you guys would know better than me, but I don't believe there's dialogue stating exactly where Cobra Kai is from. I thought maybe they got that from their time in service. Thinking it comes from Kim. Yeah. What do you think, Drew?
It could be, and also, the piece where their superior fell into the pit of snakes. I mean, that's something else that I've been thinking about a lot since we've seen that flashback to Vietnam. I think there's probably no coincidence there too, and maybe there's some type no mercy, right? He shows him no mercy, he falls into the snakes. Like, I don't know if there was actually cobras in there, but it seems like not a coincidence with that too. It'd be kind of cool if they made a connection to that one this upcoming season.
Yes, I love that. I love that. And who knows? Maybe Sensei Kim, maybe there's some kind of snake or cobra connection there too, and it all goes together with their Vietnam experience. And yeah, I can't wait. I hope they fill that out. That's going to be amazing. Now, Drew, your Last Row podcast, you go over all kinds of amazing movies, right? And part of these movies often involve villains.
Yes.
Okay. And you've been on this show with Badway before. We have rated some villains, including Terry Silver, on the villain scale. And so you have all these movie villains that you've rated on this objective scale on how villainous they are. And tell us about this idea you have for like trading cards.
Yeah, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s, right? I was born in 84, and I've got boxes of Marvel trading cards in my closet over here. I've got all kinds of collectibles and stuff, and I'm a huge fan of just comic books in general. So if anyone remembers back in the day, those Marvel trading cards where you would get a card and you'd open it up, and on the back there would be like their intelligence, their strength, their power, all these kind of silly categories, and you could sort of look at them. It wasn't like the Pokemon cards where you fight against each other. It's more about collecting them.
Right.
I don't know if anyone remembers this, but I've got boxes of these things. So I had an idea recently because we've been doing this villain scale for, gosh, almost a couple of years now. And we've been trying to find a way to, like you said, objectively rate these villains. How do they compare against each other? It's hard, right? If you're talking about like Bennett from Commando versus like, I don't know, Chief Devlin from Excessive Force, or like Dorian Tyrell from The Mask, there's got to be a way to compare these guys. So we created this category system where we have 4 major categories. We've got the look or style, the hideout or lair, their plan, and then henchman. And as I was thinking about this, I'm like, this is ripe for some type of collectible card. So I did some work, did some creation here, and I was trying to mimic this right after the 90s cards that came up. And my co-host Badway is a writing genius, so I got to give him a lot of credit for the writing that he does. But we created this card system that we're going to try to do for all of the villains on our show. And what better person to start than with Terry Silver, right? So we rated him
Yes.
together, Ken. I think you helped us put him through the scale.
Right.
So he just felt like the perfect person. So I'm working through these right now, but at the same time, why not do a little bit of a world premiere here on on the KenCast if we can, right?
This is amazing, guys. So Drew has shared with us the first look at a Terry Silver trading card with the villain scale. So Drew's gonna explain this. All right, here we go.
There you go.
Look at this, guys. Look at this.
So I tried to mimic literally the 90s cards from back in the Marvel trading days. I have some here. Next time I'll show them on the camera. But my ultimate dream would be to get some of these printed. But what you could see here is we try to pick some silly pictures, and what better picture of Terry Silver than him talking to John Kreese in the steam room in a towel? I mean, what other picture are you going to pick, right? I mean, we've got some variants, and I sent some to Ken. This is the one we went with. We had some other pictures that we wanted to go with, but the front is the picture of them, and it's the exact style I mimicked exactly from the 90s. But the back, you have our actual patented villain scale from the Last Row podcast. Our website's on there, so check it out. And he really broke the scale. I think the Superstorm from The Day After Tomorrow was the only thing that was higher than Terry, with 5s in every single category. I mean, how are you going to beat like Tornadoes for henchmen? But he's got a 5 for look and style. I forgot exactly why we did the hideout and layer for a 4, but you see the different categories, and if you just Google 90s Marvel trading cards, this will look really familiar. So it's a fun thing, and we're going to try to do this for some of the other villains that we've done. And ultimately I would love to get some of these things printed and actually do some like pack openings and stuff. So I'll probably get sued for it though. So
that is so fun, Drew. Okay, so I have to ask you, do you know how many villains you have that you've rated?
Right. So it's funny. We started doing this, man, I would say we've got like 35 or so since we came back. We had a couple-year break, and we didn't have an objective scale since, when we first started the show. We talked about a lot of them. So another idea that we've had is to maybe do some live streams of our own here in partnership with you and maybe Peter and some other folks, and then go back and maybe re-rate some of the villains that we didn't rate on some of our earlier movies. So we went back, and this was from, I think we're up to like 111 episodes now, and this was from our 13th episode when we did Karate Kid Part 3 back in like 2015. So it's been a while, but we've done about 30 plus now, and we'll go back and probably rate all the old ones too. So there's a lot of work to do, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is incredible. And guys, this is just how much fun the Last Row podcast is. It's like you have villain ratings not only for someone who's epic like Terry Silver, but also the Storm in The Day After Tomorrow. So it's like, yes, I mean, that would be a battle, right? Terry versus the Storm. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Cool. Yeah. So everyone check this out. So follow the Last Row podcast. I assume we'll hear hopefully news from you about, releases or future cards or something like that here, but also people should definitely follow the Last Row podcast, and you'll keep your listeners updated.
Yeah, this is the first one that I did. I've got some drafts of some other ones, but I wanted to share this with this group of people because, who better than to unveil the Terry Silver card than a group of Terry Silver enthusiasts here, and Ken and Peter and everyone else listening and watching along here. Thanks for thanks for liking it. And if you guys like this stuff, definitely let us know. We're going to do more, but this is the kind of show, like you asked me to describe our show. Like, this is our show in a nutshell. We do silly stuff like this. And I got to give a shout out again to Badway, because he wrote the descriptions here, and he's a master with the words. So thanks to my co-host Badway for writing the descriptions here.
Yes. Yeah. Badway, brilliant guy. Also, you guys make a great pair. Stuart Young says, fantastic, Drew.
Thank you.
Terry says, I love it. Definitely want it. Peter says, I love it. So yeah, I think rave reviews. I love that, Drew. I would, if you could somehow release a whole pack of them, heck, I'd even buy them individually.
There we go. Thank you.
I'm a huge fan. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Yeah, thank you. We'll put it on our social channels, so check out our website and all of our social handles. I'll be tweeting some of these things out and posting them on our Instagram stuff coming up. So definitely follow along and check it out. And thanks again for all the fun comments. Thanks everybody.
Yeah, great to hear from you guys. Hobby talking about Terry Silver. He says Terry Silver was secretly a serial killer from Karate Kid 3 till Cobra Kai season 4. Drew, what's your reaction to
I
that?
can't argue with that. I think at the end, so before Cobra Kai came out, if you go back and listen to our episode from 2015 or whenever it was, I'm pretty sure Babby and I speculated that he actually killed Daniel and Mr. Miyagi after the show. Obviously, we know that didn't happen now, but in the years before Cobra Kai, we had only thing we could do was speculate, and that's what we speculated. So I can't disagree with you, Javi.
Yes, absolutely. And check out, I did a video called "Is Terry Silver a Psychopath?" And if you think he's somewhere on the psychopath scale, it is possible he could be a serial killer. Not a very small percentage of psychopaths are serial killers, but that would be a possibility. Let's see. Oh, here we go.
There you go.
Bad Way. What a work of art. Yes, I agree. Well
You're
done,
a little
guys.
biased, but thank you.
Well done. Okay, so Drew, I think need to get into the meat of our discussion today. I know everyone is thinking about this question about the 80s. So let's launch into it.
KenCast discussion.
All right. All right, guys. This, I would say, is inspired by a tweet from Jon Hurwitz. Okay. And we saw this last week. Jon Hurwitz says, I've seen the Cobra Kai season 5 trailer and I'm obsessed. Perfectly sets the tone without ruining all the surprises. This one feels like a different but same kind of 80s movie. September 9th can't come soon enough. So Drew, while this is a cool tweet and it psychs us up, I think you mentioned this line. This one feels like a different but same kind of 80s movie. And so that makes us think of Cobra Kai, but it makes us think of so many different things like Stranger Things and, so many things that are at the center of our culture right now reference the 80s. And it seems very distinctive. And so today, as a movie expert, I'm going to put you on the spot. Why is the 80s so revered? Why are we so obsessed with it still? And that's the question I'm going to throw out to you and also everyone in the chat. Throw us your ideas as to why the 80s is so well regarded. But Drew, I was wondering, do you have any sort of initial ideas as to why the 80s rocked?
Yeah, I mean, I think just look at some of the movies that came out, and I'm obviously biased because this is my favorite era of movies, the 80s and 90s. And I'm on record of being an old man punching at a cloud saying they don't make them like they used to, but I really do believe that they really don't make them like they used to, whether it's like just the scale of the story or even sometimes the simplicity of the story. The characters, I mean, we got Terry Silver out of 1989. What more could we ask for, right? You've got villains that just are over the top, plots that are over the top. And even if they try to do that now, like it just doesn't work. It doesn't feel the same. So I've been on record. We said this before, right? You make a movie like John Wick, which is one of my favorite modern movies. It's more sort of like an up-to-date sort of action type movie. But then you go back and you watch a movie like Hard Target. I mean, that's the 90s, but you go watch Roadhouse from 1989. Like nothing really happens in that movie for the most part. It's just a guy like trying to, be a cooler at a bar. But like, what more could you want? I mean, it's just a great movie. And it's like, it's hard to describe, but there's a certain feel to them. And we could break it down. I think we're going to have to, but
Yeah,
that's sort of in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that you're right. We're just going to have to break this down because there's a lot that's great there. Terry says 80s has such great music. I listen to it most every other, listen to it all the time. Aurelio says, here's what made the 80s the greatest decade in movies, music, and sports. Authenticity. Interesting. Wild Man. Thank you, Wild Man. Thank you for the super chat. We love super chats here. They help support the channel and they help pay the bills. So thank you so much, Wild Man, for your super chat. He said Stranger Things led the way for its nostalgia trend and led the way for Cobra Kai, if you look at it. And you're right. It was a huge hit. Stranger Things was a huge hit based firmly in the 80s, really played upon 80s nostalgia. The thing is, though, true, there's the nostalgia piece, and I think that's important, and maybe we should talk about nostalgia. But it seems like the 80s is also very an interesting topic for people who weren't around in the 80s,
Yeah.
who wouldn't be nostalgic for the 80s.
Yeah.
Like a new generation is interested in the 80s. And so maybe we should talk about that. So like there's the nostalgia thing. You and I, we have memories, some, slight memories of the 80s or most of the decade. But yeah, I look upon it fondly, and there is that nostalgia for the movies and the TV shows we saw when we were really little. How important do you think that is to our obsession with the 80s?
I mean, there's some good comments here that have said the nostalgia piece, because I think it definitely plays a part of it. Like, I think Rabana, what she said here about the 70s, people being obsessed with the 50s, there's sort of like that 20-year window or so, I guess. And I think, we've talked about this before as well, maybe why the 80s are coming back is that people that were growing up during that time period are now the content creators, and they have an opportunity to now create content within those particular time frame settings, which is kind of interesting. But I think, like, at least with the 80s, to me, and again, I'm biased, but there's so many franchises and things that came from them that have really just sort of cemented themselves in the pop culture, like, zeitgeist, right? You've got Back to the Future, you've got certain parts of the second and third Star Wars original trilogy movies, you've got movies like Top Gun. Yeah, Ben, like all the stuff you listed here, like I have a list of just, I mentioned Roadhouse earlier, like you put the Goonies, like that's such an influential movie for a lot of people. Stand By Me is another one that really stands out with, some of these actors that are still in things today. But I think, you mentioned, is it the nostalgia thing? I think there's a difference between the Stranger Things piece, where it's like literally set in the 80s, and then you've got Cobra Kai, which is sort of a continuation that still has an 80s feel to it. You've got Johnny, who's still kind of living in the 80s with whether it's his music, whether it's his cars, whether it's just kind of his attitude. And then Stranger Things is like literally set in the 80s. So there's a little bit of a difference, but I agree. It sort of did pave the way for a series like Cobra Kai to come back. So there's a lot. I mean, I think music, scale of the story, there's a lot to kind of break down here, I think.
Absolutely. Wildman, thank you again for the super chat. My goodness. Guys, thank you for the super chats. To me, the 80s represented the more happier and simpler times every human being wants, instead of the crazy stuff going on today. So that's an interesting thought too, and it kind of plays into nostalgia. It's sort of that when we were younger, it seemed as though things were simpler, things made sense, and we get that from our parents, who say, well, back when I was young, things were better because X, and so that plays into it. But is there something beyond that, Drew? Is there something that's actually sort of true beyond nostalgia, that things were simpler or happier, or that's the vibe that the 80s movies and shows gave off?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about the vibe of them, because they were simpler in a way, right? We talk about Roadhouse. It's just a guy trying to, man a bar. I mean, in simplest terms, right? I mean, there was some obviously commentary and social commentary movies, but a lot of the popular movies were, something like Predator. You've got an alien coming back, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's running away from him in a forest, like,
right,
or a jungle, and then you got, like, I don't know, Bloodsport. It's just the Kumite, right? It's like,
right,
you got Jean-Claude Van Damme just going through a fighting tournament to the death. I mean, the stakes were high, but the plot is very simple. And there's
right,
something to be said about watching something like that. And I guess you could say it's, oh, I don't have to think too hard, but there's something to be said for it. It's fun. It doesn't try to do too much. And it's just something that a lot of people can enjoy. But then you had other things like Breakfast Club, right, which had some messages to it, right? It wasn't
right,
just people, mindless plot. It was a simple plot, but it was about
right,
the dynamics between people that were, in detention. And you got the jock, you've got the popular girl, you've got the outcast. There's something different there, but it's also very 80s feel, right?
right.
There's a lot more, I think, there too. But I think you and I had also mentioned when we were chatting the other day, just about like the internet and like technology. So obviously technology was around back then, but news spread a little bit slower. You still had cable news and TV news and all that stuff,
Right.
but you didn't see, if you didn't really want to see it, it wasn't like in clickbait articles in your face all the time. You go on Twitter, you go everywhere. It's I don't know. It's hard to describe what I'm trying to say, but hopefully it makes somewhat of of sense.
I think that makes perfect sense, and I think that internet piece is very important. I think it's going to be very important in our discussion going forward. Kendon Lacey, guys, this is one of the most brilliant improvisational comedians I've ever seen in my life. Thank you for joining us on Facebook, Kendon. He says people of the 80s have more access with technology to tell that story, social media, etc., whereas people from the 50s had to rely on word of mouth of stories, books, but not as much technology. So that's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
It almost feels like it's more, those kinds of stories were much more organic, and there has to be more of that person to person relatability of these stories without that barrier of technology.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good comment. I like that a lot.
Yeah, wonderful. Stuart says the rewatchability of 80s movies is nuts. I can't think of 2000s movies that I've watched quite as much. That's an interesting point too. So is that something about the characters and the story that of these movies that tended to be made during the 80s? Do you
I
think that
think
makes them rewatchable?
Yeah, and I think, Stuart, you raised a really good point because I'm thinking about some maybe silly popcorn type movies from the 2000s. Like, I don't know, I'm thinking like a movie like The Core, which is,
Right.
what is it, like Aaron Eckhart going to the center of the core to restart the Earth? Like,
Yes.
I don't know, it's not very classic, but it's sort of a simple plot, but it doesn't have the same feel as something like, I don't know, like Top Gun, where it's just like they're
Right.
in fighting, like jet fighter school and all this stuff, or even just a something like as simple as like RoboCop. I know there's a lot of like politics sort of behind the scenes with RoboCop. You've got the corporations and all of that kind of stuff, but it just feels a little simpler. And I don't know if maybe it's the volume of stuff that was coming out in the 2000s versus maybe in the 80s where there wasn't as much,
Hmm.
but maybe the budgets seemed a little higher too in the 80s for some of these things, relatively speaking. I know there's like a movie like Eurotrip. If anyone's ever seen Eurotrip, it's a stupid movie. I could rewatch that, I guess, but it's not the same as a movie like, I don't know, Uncle Buck. It's like,
Right. Right.
it's and the personalities in some of these movies, like these simple plots had huge stars, like very, very big movie stars. People like Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, all those the SNL actors and the people from the SNL, school of comedy. It's a little bit different. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just seems like the quality was different, even with the simpler plots.
Yes. And Wildman, thank you for the super chat. He says, don't forget Rambo. That
Yeah,
franchise
that's right.
made the 80s look, if he's right. And that was an era of movie stars. And that's kind of like what you're talking about, I think, Drew, and also you, Wildman, is this idea of, you've got Sylvester Stallone, you've got these big action movie stars where you could have just a very simple, straightforward action story with a huge star like
Yep.
Sylvester Stallone or Arnold
Yeah.
Schwarzenegger. You could have just a very simple concept comedy starring John Candy or
Yep.
Dan Aykroyd or any of these other comedy stars that could support an entire movie. There's something about that. I just don't know if that could happen now. I don't know if people would
No.
leave their home and go to the theater to watch say a Bill Murray comedy like they did in the 80s.
It doesn't really compute. I mean, think about, you mentioned an action movie, right? I'll give another one, Commando.
Yeah.
Like, what actually happens in that movie? Nothing really. Like, it's his daughter gets stolen and he goes to they wanted him to help throw over like the dictator, I guess, in that fake town. And it's like nothing really happens, but it's such a fun movie because it's just Arnold wrecking stuff and taking out all these guys. And it's just a great, great movie. And you mentioned like a simple comedy, like, I don't know, I'm thinking about something like Airplane, which is like, that's
Mhm.
1980, but it's right there. Nothing, it's just so simple, but it's so genius. Like they don't make, I'm gonna say it again. You can get the old man button out ready, but they don't make them like they used to. They really don't.
Right. And comedy, which is, important to me. I've kind of lamented the state of comedy, like as far as comedy movies. We just haven't had great comedy movies. I don't think as a genre, for some reason,
Right.
it doesn't seem bankable. It doesn't seem like people go out to see comedies anymore. And I don't know why that is culturally. But you really could do that in the 80s.
Yeah, I think a lot of the comedians will go on record of like, and this isn't to be a political statement, but I do think that there is this maybe sensitivity of offending people, and studios are afraid to put something out that might cause a backlash. Whereas in the 80s, wasn't as sensitive with that kind of stuff. And I'm, for better or worse, right? But I think that there was a lot of like stances on things, and what came out then, it just was out. And now I think you're seeing a lot of that. And you're right, like it may be not as bankable. They're not as expensive to make, but I think they may not make as much money as something like a studio tentpole, like these giant Marvel films, or these giant like cinematic universe connected type movies, which
Right.
are good for themselves. And then we didn't really have that back then. So that's a cool thing, I guess, that exists now. But uh, some would argue that that's actually, taking things the wrong way, right? Everything's a
Right.
popcorn flick. It feels generic, and it feels the same, like a cookie cutter, whereas you
Right.
didn't really get that. Like if you look at Back to the Future, yes, there was a trilogy there, but it was so unique, and the concept was so cool, and
Mhm.
each movie felt a little different, and it was very well done. So,
Right.
yeah, it's just a different way to look at it, I guess. But I think you're right. Maybe they're not as bankable as some of the other one for some of the reasons we mentioned.
Right. And Seema says the 80s was a carefree time and it translates into the movies. I agree with Drew about technology. Zach says next will be 90s nostalgia. I've already seen 90s nostalgia start to creep in with certain recent movies and TV shows, and I'm a child from the 80s. It's my favorite retro decade, but somewhat overrated. It's interesting because I grew up, like, I remember the 90s, of course, way more than I remember the 80s. Uh, but even so, I feel like I can define in my brain what 80s is maybe a little bit better than what 90s is.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just me. But I don't know. How do you feel? Do you feel like it's easier to define sort of like the 80s style, all these 80s qualities versus 90s qualities?
I'm gonna say something now, and I don't know if this is gonna make any sense at all, but when you think about like, look at the year 1980 versus 1989. 1980 is closer to the 70s than literally closer to the 70s than 89 is to the 90s. But I feel like the rate of change, and this might be wrong, but this is how it feels to me. The
Right.
80s feels more self-contained, whereas you look at, and we go back to the technology that we talked about,
Yes.
1990 is so different than 1999. Like, think about a movie like The Matrix versus something that came out in, I don't know, like 1990. It's like worlds different, and the rate of change with the technology made such a difference too, that I think it's very different. When I think of the 90s, I think about like neon colors. I think of like slime, because that was like hot back in the 90s. I think of
Right.
rollerblading, like I guess things like that. And I think there were some 90s nostalgia things that are popping up. Like, you've seen, I think, what was it, X-Men? It was the First Class series of movies where they tried to do something in the 90s, but it was like so on the nose. It didn't blend. I think it was like, hey, I'm trying to be 90s right now. And it just
Right.
felt like very in your face. Whereas some of the 80s stuff sort of, it's just like you're there in the 80s. You've got the synth wave, synthesizers, the music. Maybe that's not fair, but that's how it feels to me.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And Wildman, thank you for the super chat, guys. Love the super chats. Like, today is so nostalgic for the 80s. The 80s were nostalgic for the 50s. That's an interesting point. Something I noticed as well, and I could be totally wrong on this, is that you had a lot of media in subsequent decades focusing back on stories that took place in the 40s. I think there was a lot of stuff that took place in the 40s that seemed to be like a very popular era to set movies and TV shows. And I'm wondering, maybe more so than the 30s, maybe because that was the Depression, and maybe more so than the 50s. I don't think we've seen as many works on TV and film look back on the 50s as they've looked back on the 40s.
Right.
And maybe that was because, we're in World War II or coming out of World War II, that type of thing. And I'm wondering if the 80s is almost kind of another sort of magnet where maybe a lot of stuff seems to be drawn to the 80s as far as like a setting or
Yeah.
a time that we want to live in, or there's something about that where even though there might be 90s nostalgia going forward, people still might want to look more at the 80s.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, World War II was a big part of the piece about the 40s/50s, and everything that you really see back then was related to, like, I don't know, Saving Private Ryan. You get like movies out there that are sort of talking about that, or at least recapping that. In the 80s, there was so much happening, whether it was, some of the like teen romance kind of movies, or these giant action movies. Like, I don't know, things were getting, I guess, they were simpler. I don't want to say simpler. It's probably, I'm saying that too much, but I think the simple plots, but with the big budgets, made a big difference. And I think you're right. Like, relating back to people, um, you had more of the people paying attention to pop culture and whatnot. I think it's more relatable to people. Whereas if you go back, decades earlier, it's just maybe not as relatable to people. And like, think about now, people are collecting VHS again. People are collecting like
Right.
literal like relics from the past, right? And VHS,
Yes.
it's one thing if you say like I'm gonna listen to vinyl because maybe you could argue it sounds better than digital and all that stuff. I get that. Like a record is high quality, but no one's going back to a cassette tape saying like this sounds better or watching a VHS tape. Like, have you watched a VHS tape in a while? It's
All right.
pretty, it's I mean, it's a cool like hipster factor, I guess. And I've got a Batman 89 VHS tape right behind me over here.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm probably not going to pop it in and watch that over a 4K remaster of the movie. So
Right. And it's something too, I think, about the VHS, maybe beyond even, you're right about that quality, but that was kind of a time intensive. It was a very like interactive and time intensive way to watch a movie, because you put it in and then it would start and you'd hit play and then you'd watch it and then you'd have to rewind it,
Yes.
And so it's like, it's weird. It's like a type of media that you're spending a lot more time with than you are with like a Blu-ray or streaming or something like that. And maybe that's the bond. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I don't know if you've ever felt this way or anyone in the audience has felt this way, but I know for a fact, like when I'm watching things, I'll browse Netflix or I'll browse the digital library for like 20 minutes. And then I don't want to commit to anything. And then when I finally do, it's like, I don't really want to watch this. And then I might turn it off. Whereas if I'm popping the disc in or I'm going to put the tape in, like that's a commitment. You're putting that in, you're going to watch that. Like
Right.
I remember going, and this is another thing about the 80s and 90s, right? I miss Blockbuster. I miss going to the video store. I miss
Right.
it. And it's a shame that people don't really have that experience anymore. Me and my friends, we would go to the video store on a night and we would browse the walls. It's like a visual like medium where you pick a movie and it's like that's the one you're watching. Like you're not going to go back. Like you paid for that. You're going to go
Right.
watch that. There's something about that experience that's just so I miss that. Talk about nostalgia. I miss that, and I think the 80s and 90s, it's I don't know, it's like that, and it is nostalgia, right? I made that card. The card is from the 90s, so it's like I guess there's something to be said about the 90s too.
Right. I know. And I don't know if that's amazing to people watching this who are younger now, but yeah, we used to do that. We used to get in the car and drive to a store, walk in and browse, sometimes up to an hour, looking at all the movies we could watch, then picked it and paid for it, brought it home, had to rewind it after watching it, and had to return that physically to the store. That's what we used to do. I mean,
yeah.
does that sound crazy now? Or
And I know that I'm not going to say that streaming isn't convenient. I mean, there's been times where it's like I know what I want to watch, and I'm glad I don't have to drive to go do that. But at
Right.
the same time, the experience of doing that, picking out the movie, or you have a sleepover at your friend's house growing up, or you're hanging out with your buddies and you get that and you get like a video game too to play on your Sega Genesis or your Super Nintendo. You're going to rent Mortal Kombat 1 or Mortal Kombat 2 along with it. And then you go watch a movie, picking that and get a pizza from Pizza Hut. Like I'm hopefully I'm speaking people's language right now, but that's like growing up to me doing that. And it was a lot of fun. And I definitely miss those days. It's very nostalgic to me.
I 100% agree. I saw this comment from Josh. This is somewhat not related. Maria from Cobra Cole is the same actress, Carla the Worker, who Terry Silver helps when Kreese met him. It's actually not the same actress, but I am very glad that you made that connection. If you guys have not seen Cobra Cole, check it out. There's a link in the description and you can see what Josh is talking about. Man, so many great comments. Stuart Young referencing Airplane, Don't Call Me Shirley, and Robana too.
R.I.P. Leslie. Leslie Nielsen was a comedic genius, man.
Oh, absolutely incredible. Okay, so Kendon, thanks for watching, Kendon. My gosh, guys, Kendon's amazing. National Lampoons was killing the comedy game and taking these people that were comedians before actors and turning them into actors, improvisers, Second City players were getting in front of the camera on the big screen. That made comedy magic. That's such an important point. There was like that value in comedic performance, that they were comedians before, they were big movie stars. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if anyone's watching now who's in the industry that might kind of understand what's going on, but it seems like there isn't that confidence or to develop these comedians into bankable movie stars. I'm trying to think of like some of the latest ones, maybe like the Will Ferrell era might be kind of, but after that, are there really any comedic actors who are movie stars?
I mean, they try to do like Pete Davidson, I guess, is like
Right.
a more recent one, and he's pretty funny. I've seen some of the movies. I think he was in that movie King of Staten Island, which is actually a pretty good movie. I enjoyed that.
Right.
But you're right. Like that comment is amazing because I mean, I think back to just Vacation and Christmas Vacation, which is one of my all-time favorite movies,
Right.
another 80s movie, right? But
Right.
those two are incredible movies. And there's others, right? Animal House, there's a lot of other films that I'm just glossing over here unintentionally, but I think that's such a spot on comment that it really uncovers a lot, I think, with the differences there too. I love what he said there.
Right. And going on with the National Lampoon, Wild Man, thanks for the super chat. Don't forget John Hughes, the Stanley Kubrick of the 80s, and John Hughes was like intimately involved with all these. He was involved, I think, was he second? I think he was, or no, National Lampoon. He was part of that publication. He wrote for that. And he came up with National Lampoon's Vacation, the Vacation movies, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Obviously, The Breakfast
Uncle Buck
Club
too, right? Didn't he do Uncle Buck as well?
He did. Yes.
That's right.
And so amazing, and very character focused, very relatable. Like these stories resonated because they were just very relatable. And I think you can look at something like The Breakfast Club now as a time capsule of teen life in the 80s in a way.
It's a really good way to put it too. And I think like time capsule is a great way. Like you go back and watch some of these movies, and it's something as simple as I was thinking about this recently. I was watching a movie or listening to another podcast about something, and they were talking about, hey, there wasn't a cell phone in this movie, and having a cell phone would have completely broken the plot. And you think about a movie like even just like Home Alone, like if they if they had a cell phone, I know that's like in the 90s, but like they just had a cell phone. Hey, Kevin, we'll see you in a couple weeks. Whoops, we forgot you. Okay, call your neighbor or call your uncle or whatever. And it's like, okay, be home in a week. Like it's
Right.
no big deal, right? It would completely break the plot. So back to the technology thing, it's like it's just really interesting how some of that stuff affects some of the plots. And we talk about them being so simple. I think it's an interesting way to look at it. And I don't know, it's a very big difference between some of the stuff now. And I enjoy a lot of the stuff now too. Don't get me wrong. It's just,
Right.
in my opinion, like there's some nostalgia factor that just draws me back to those 2 decades, the 80s and 90s, and the 80s in particular, that I just love.
Right. Dave Srock, following up on our conversation. I love VHS because pan and scan looks so good. Because if anyone doesn't know what pan and scan is, like right now, the image you're watching is widescreen. Back in the day, it was like more squarish. And so they had to like zoom in and move back and forth on the image in order to make it for VHS. So yeah, that was exciting. Obvious says Batman 89 is pure coolness and pizza. Yeah, thank you for your comments. And that kind of gets to maybe, so if we're going to throw out some like 80s types of definitions, how do we define the 80s? Batman makes me think of like just the style. Like there was a certain style that was acceptable, whether it's like visual design or fashion, cinematography. There was something that was very 80s. Would you agree that?
Yeah. It had that gothic aesthetic to it. I mean, it's a Tim Burton style in particular, who's also feels, I know he's done more modern movies too, but he feels very 80s in a way because of maybe I associate him with Batman 89 all the time. But also Prince and the soundtrack of that movie, Prince is quintessential 80s, and you think about a lot of the songs from that. And I think the music and the soundtrack is another big thing that defines a lot of these movies, whether you have synthesizers or you've got like, I'm thinking even Karate Kid 3, where you've got Glory of Love, you've got Peter Cetera, and like some of these like big epic like ballads. And a lot of those are in some of these movies too. Or you've just got sort of like saxophone and whatnot. And this is a popular genre that's coming back. Like synthwave there's a band that I like called The Midnight, and they lean into that 80s synthesizer. They've got saxophones in the music, and it brings you back, right? Neon colors and all of that. And you mentioned the style and the aesthetic. The look and feel of some of these things with the neon lights and just like that, even Blade Runner, like that was a movie set in very much the future, but it looks like the 80s, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, it can't escape the fact that it's still in the 80s. Yes, I totally agree. And then going back to like, I think when you were talking about Blockbuster, you spurred a lot of conversation, Drew. Eliza says some of my best childhood memories were in Blockbuster. Stuart Young says Blockbuster store has a nice smell and great popcorn. Peter says Blockbuster was my library. The back of movie boxes were the only reading I did in high school. And Obvious says streaming is kind of overrated. So yeah, yeah, a little bit. I agree. Wild Man, thanks for the super chat. Cobra Kai wasn't the only Cobra that's struck in the 80s. Remember, Cobra was Stallone. Yeah, exactly. And I wonder, I know Stallone has said he's a fan of Cobra Kai, so might we see him in a future season? I don't know. Would he do a cameo?
That would be
I'm not
amazing.
sure. Wild Man, speaking of the teen genre, is it dead?
That's a good one because you get a lot of those. So the teen genre doesn't really exist in the way that it does today, like or the way that it did. I think you got different type of movies where they do like, what is it, Divergent, Insurgent, like those teen like novelization type stuff. Like what's the one with Jennifer Lawrence? I'm blanking here. The Hunger Games,
Right.
like that kind of stuff is more like the teen genres that you're seeing versus some of these other like Breakfast Club kind of movies.
Right.
Maybe there's some, but I'm having a hard time thinking of some. It's a good comment.
That is a great comment. And Wild Man, thanks for the super chat, says Prince or Michael Jackson, which, okay, brings up a really great point about the 80s, the music, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's fair. It's like, if we're talking about 80s music, 80s movies, they're going to have 80s music in it. And there's something very distinctive about 80s music. Don't you think?
Oh yeah. I mean, we were just chatting about like the saxophone and the synthesizers and like the way that the hook was always this huge like hook for a lot of these movies and the choruses in some of these songs. And like a lot of these movies, like think about the movie, right? It had a big song from the movie. And you get, I guess, like think about the new Bond films and you've got like the Bond song, like who's going to be the person that's singing the Bond movie. But back then, every one of these movies had a giant like hook or a giant song that was on the soundtrack. You'd buy the soundtrack with it, had the tape, right? I had the Ghostbusters cassette tape over here. And I still have that. And I think about some of the songs there. I mean, Ray Parker Jr. is like the iconic theme song. Huey Lewis and the News from Back to the Future. There's just huge soundtrack songs. And I think that was also a big part of what made some of these movies what they were too. You could hear the song and it brings you to the movie, or you watch the movie and you think of the song. It had that like symbiotic relationship between the two.
Yes. And another one, a sequel that's popular this year is Top Gun and Maverick. But man, that original Top Gun soundtrack, that was like the perfect soundtrack and it sold so much. Yeah. And do you think maybe there is that symbiotic relationship you're talking about because in the 80s, it was maybe a little harder to go see the movies, or if they were in theaters, they didn't come out in home video for a while. So a way you could kind of relive the fun of the movie was to put on the song.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because if you wanted to remember what you were thinking, you just pop in the soundtrack and you're kind of remembering the scenes. And then when you go and watch the movie, you want to pop the soundtrack in when you're done because you want to be kind of thinking about the movie. I think it's a really good point that you made.
Absolutely's around. Great to see you. 80s is the best music ever. Robana talks about TV. I also remember the cartoon intros from the 80s because they were basically song videos. They felt like actual songs and not just cartoon intros. And that's something I think we've seen intros kind of go away. They become smaller. With streaming, it's easy to skip the intro. But back in the day, man, intros were their own thing that you look forward to. Like, for instance, the Ghostbusters animated series intro.
I'm still watching that with my daughter right now. We watch that every Saturday morning. They put them on YouTube here. So they're like, I don't know if they're every Saturday, but they're putting a lot of the old episodes out. I know it's not 80s, but it's a 90s cartoon. The 1992 X-Men cartoon has one of the most rockin' soundtrack songs in the beginning. I love that song.
100%. I totally agree. Ken and Lacey says, even musical artists today are trying to capture 89 sounds again. Bruno Mars, Lizzo songs Walk the Moon. They are going back to the technology and sounds used in the studio to capture that nostalgia. That's so interesting. So, Drew, to me, it's like that points to something sort of beyond nostalgia, because there is something super distinctive about the 80s, and not just the musical sounds and not just the technology, which were a big part. But some people said honesty, I think, in the comments, and I'm wondering if it's something about sincerity. Like, there's just something very just bold. Like, everyone in their music and their movies and stories seemed to wear their heart on their sleeve. Like they didn't hold anything back. There was sort of like a lack of cynicism. Everyone was just really honest and not afraid to say how they felt, and it didn't matter if it was like too big. They just did it. Is there something there?
I think, yeah, and I think maybe you dug into like the nuance of what when I was saying before when I was talking about the simplicity. I think yes, part of it is the simplicity, but I think you nailed it because I think there's that other piece of the simplicity, which is the sincerity, like you said, and I think you made a really great point there because I think people were trying to capture that, or they're just putting themselves out there and they're just trying to put this thing out there. Like, I don't know. I'm just thinking about some of these movies, like talk about Breakfast Club, right? It's not trying to be anything complex. I mean, it's got a message to it, but it's pretty simple, straight to forward. And it's also sincere in what it's saying. And maybe certain movies don't hold up the same way that others do. But I think a movie like that is somewhat timeless because of that. And as the comment just mentioned, some of the music, people going back to those things, you know, there's doing that for a reason. I think those sounds, it brings people back to a different time, and it also sounds good. I mean, they wouldn't do it if people didn't like it, right? And I think that's another big part of it. It's popular for a reason, and I think that's another piece that brings people coming back to some of these things.
That's a really good point. And we were talking about Airplane and those movies, and Zach says, I miss spoof comedy movies.
Yeah.
It seems like from the 2010s and up, those movies just aren't even attempted anymore. I still want to see Spaceballs too. Yes. But I know I'll probably never get that. And Mel Brooks has gone on record saying that he will do it if Rick Moranis agrees to do it. So that would be incredible. But there's something about that too, because I miss spoofs. I love spoofs. And there's something just pure about the idea of we're going to have a bunch of silly gags. The whole point of this movie is just to laugh. Like we don't need a crazy plot. You know, it doesn't have to be complex. We just want to make you laugh. And we're going to basically throw 10 gags like every minute at you. And if you don't laugh at 9 of them, that's okay, as long as you laugh at 1 of them. That just doesn't happen anymore.
No, they don't. And you know, I have a theory for this. I think Scary Movie killed them because they did too many of them. And I think there's something to be said for that because I think about like Loaded Weapon or what's the other one? Like man, I'm blanking now. There's Loaded Weapon, there was Hot Shots. Hot Shots Part 1, Part 2 is like so stupidly funny. And they just throw this dumb jokes at you. And Not Another Teen Movie was kind of funny too. I know that wasn't most recent, but then you had Scary Movie, which was kind of funny, and then they just kept making so many of them. And like I love Naked Gun. Like we talk about Leslie Nielsen. Like if you go back and watch those movies are so funny because they're smart too. Like yes, they're kind of silly, but they're smartly done. And the jokes in that are just so beyond anything that I've seen recently. It's like so good.
And we talked about rewatchability in the comments before, but those types of movies were so rewatchable because they packed the frame. They had visual gags going on in the background. They had like all these things that they packed in there so that you'd almost have to watch it 2 or 3 times to get and to see all the jokes that they have crammed in there. Really, really cool. Wildman, Stranger Things and Cobra Kai does have that teen subgenre, which is interesting because they're almost kind of notable for that. It's like, it's almost like they had to reference the 80s to really dive back into the idea of, you know, the teen, sort of like the serious, quasi-serious teen drama thing.
Yeah, well, and something we talked about before, we talked about like what makes sort of the 80s. We've mentioned like the epicness and like that cheesiness, and the teen subgenre piece is kind of somewhere in the middle of there. And I'll try to explain what I mean. But I was thinking about the earlier season of Cobra Kai when they had like the fight in the school and Miguel gets injured. And as I was watching that, I kind of rolled my eyes. I'm like, this is so ridiculous. But it's kind of a callback to the type of stuff that would happen in the 80s, the fight in LaRusso's house. When you think about that, it's so ridiculous. It's like, because it's set now, but if that was in an 80s movie, I wouldn't have batted any eyes. And the same thing with some of the stuff that happens in the most recent season of Stranger Things. Some of that stuff, without giving away any spoilers, I was kind of like, oh, okay, I'm kind of tired of this. I want to see more of this other piece of the plot. But then I thought, very reminiscent of the 80s, you know, and I guess
Mhm.
it's hard to be it's hard to be mad at that. And you know, that cheesiness, the epicness of some of the plots is what also makes some of these movies what they are. And the villain plays into that too, right? You want this over the top
Oh,
villain, somebody just absolutely ridiculous. And I think, you know, Terry Silver is a good example of that. He is the
mhm.
quintessential 80s villain to me. It's
Right,
like not a ton of backstory at the time, but he's just bad because he's bad. Just, you know,
right.
it is what it is.
Right, exactly, and, starting with even Karate Kid 1, John Kreese,
Yeah.
he wasn't as, I don't know, theatrical as Terry Silver, but it was still that idea. He was just bad, and, he was like an '80s villain. He was like this unstoppable force. There wasn't too much to sympathize,
Yeah.
with him about, and really Martin Kove did such an amazing job. That's an iconic character too. And then it's like they doubled down on that when they created Terry Silver, and Thomas Ian Griffiths just like embraced
Yeah.
that. It was so amazing.
Well, I was just talking to my friend Badway, and I was him and my other friend, and we were just chatting about like Karate Kid 3 and, you know, talk about another 80s plot, right? They faked Kreese's death. And I know there was reasons behind this, but they faked his death, and then he winds up jumping out of a cardboard cutout of himself to scare Daniel. Like, how
Right,
much more 80s are you gonna get than that? And that's amazing. Like, that's so silly that it's amazing. And
right,
it's like, if they did that today, it just wouldn't work. But I feel
right,
like it was so well done, and Martin Kove is amazing as well. It's just the way that they pull that off. It's such an 80s plot that it describes the silliness, the cheesiness, and the epicness of something that would only happen in a 1989 film.
right. And I think it wouldn't work today because people wouldn't be able to fully commit to the idea. Like
Right.
there'd be some part of them that'd be like, "Oh, this is cheesy," and so it wouldn't work. Like you have to fully commit to stuff like that, I
Yeah.
think. And of course, Bad Way here, you got to buy the cassette single of the main movie song, 199. Yes.
Go
Oh,
to the
those were great
wall. What
days.
is it? The Wall at the place called The Wall, and then it was something else after that? I'm dating myself now.
Just great stuff. Kate says, "This is why Cobra Kai succeeds as a walk down memory lane. It brings the nostalgia without trying to be the nostalgia, unlike
Yeah,
80s shows turned into 21st century movies." That's a really great point, and it kind of gets to, our discussion of legacy sequels, and what works and what doesn't work. And you're right, Cobra Kai, I think, really works on its own.
yeah,
It doesn't
yeah.
depend on the nostalgia.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great point. It does its own thing while doing the perfect amount of callbacks to what it was before, but it's also unique enough and stands on its own versus trying to be something that's just like, "Hey, remember this? Remember that? Remember this?" It's
Right.
got its own story, and I think it works so well because of that.
Absolutely. And Badway says 80s comedies use sincerity, 90s and beyond use sarcasm. Great point, Ken. And guys, I honestly think that's another reason why all of these great holiday comedies that you want to go back and rewatch year after year, I think a lot of them came from the 80s, and it's because they were so sincere. And if you have that sort of cynicism or sarcasm that you find in later years, I don't think you necessarily want to return to those, or you don't feel very bonded to the characters,
Yeah.
like you do with like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and Christmas Vacation, and just all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Even Home Alone, right? It's a very
Yeah,
sincere movie. It just is what it is, and I don't think it tries to be anything else, and it's not making some sarcastic message or something. I think it's a really good point that you made there.
yes. And Wild Man, thank you for the super chat. Thanks for supporting the channel. Forget Stallone doing a cameo on Cobra Kai. How about a Cobra 2? Speaking of nostalgic sequels, I think Stallone, he's been totally into kind of resuscitating his old franchises. So maybe I'm sure he's thought of that.
Yeah.
I don't know. What would you think? Would you want a Cobra sequel, Drew?
I'm never gonna say no to that, so I would take it.
Yes. Um, National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon 1, Bad Way says that. And Jay says, I miss those buddy cop films. And then this is a parody of that. This has Emilio Estevez in a very early role, might have been his first movie role, Samuel L. Jackson. And that was a spoof of the Lethal Weapon movies. And guys, I'm pretty sure that's on HBO Max right now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if I'd call it like the absolute best spoof movie, but I thought it was really funny. And you might check it out. I think this was early 90s, like when they kind of the end of the spoof movies. So I don't know. Were you a fan of Loaded
It's a
Weapon
great
1?
one.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
like that one a lot because it's so silly, and I
Yes.
think the acting is great, and it nails the buddy cop dynamic too. And like, buddy cop things are always funny in general, but it's like a funnier version of that. So I think it's great. I would definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't seen it.
Absolutely. Now, Peter brings up an interesting point. I would argue some of the scary movies were some of the last best parodies. It was movies like Epic Movie, Date Movie, and Superhero Movie that killed the spoof parody genre. Yeah, I think there was something to that. Those movies, and I won't say I've seen them, so I can't be fair to them, but it did seem like they were very kind of quick, cheap, sort of cash grab spoofs that really just traded on, oh, we're referencing a scene from 300, or oh, we're referencing a scene from like these other movies, and didn't really put a lot of thought or love
Yeah.
into the jokes.
It
Did you
was
see
like
any of those?
memeing it. I haven't seen the last ones that Peter mentioned, but
Yeah.
I haven't seen them because I also felt like it was what you said, where it
Mhm.
was like, okay, they're just like you said, here's a scene from 300. Whereas if you watch something like, I don't know, I'm thinking about Naked Gun and those movies, like every scene was so crafted and they were so funny, and like
Right.
it wasn't referencing something else a lot of times. It may be referencing more of like a pop culture like idea or concept, but the jokes themselves were just funny with the characters or something that maybe exists in society, but not just remember this, remember that, remember this, and it's just a
Right.
callback. It's almost like memeing versus becoming its own thing. So I don't disagree with what you're saying, Peter. I think it's a fair point for sure.
Right. And you know who the best people I think to ask about this might be? Would be John, Josh, and Hayden, who created Cobra Kai, because they grew up in that era. They are experts in comedy. And they actually did, like, after these movies, you had sort of like the American Pie, these raunchy teen comedy movies, and they eventually, contributed to that series as well.
Yep.
And so it'd be interesting to hear their thoughts on what happened with comedy,
Yeah,
you know?
I'm on the record. I'm a huge American Pie fan. Like that is like
Mhm.
ultimate nostalgia to me. That series. I know it's not for everybody, but those movies always will have a special place in my heart. It's when I was growing up, right? You watch those. It was our Animal House kind of thing from my generation. But even the Harold and Kumar movies, which I know they're associated with, those were funny too. Like I like those, and they're not like straight spoof movies. But I thought American Reunion was a good movie, and I really
Right.
enjoy that one. And I think the way that they did it, where they called back to some of the original American Pie pieces, and they've done it in a way as if like, hey, you're the same age as these people. They're going through these different part of their life. Like I thought it was well done, and give them credit for that. But I agree with you. They're some of the right people to ask too. I think.
Absolutely. Here's a question from Obvious. Do you think the trend of having gray area characters and sympathetic villains is overdone nowadays?
Man, it's funny because I was thinking this as I was watching one of the last scenes in the most recent Cobra Kai season. I don't want Kreese to have a redemption arc. I don't want Terry Silver to have a redemption arc. Like I
Right.
want them to be bad, and I want them to be bad for just being bad. I don't know. I think like maybe it's fine if Kreese does, but I think like this redemption arc of everybody being sympathetic and everybody being that, like I like the movie where this guy's just a bad guy and that's what it is, and it's the end of the movie. He gets beat up or he doesn't. I think it's a very good point that you made there.
Right. And of course, I think that's one of the reasons why I love Terry Silver so much, is just because he loves being bad. I mean, he
Yeah,
loves what he's doing. And I think that's why a lot of us just want to see him win. I
yeah,
mean, it'd be so much fun because that's what he wants in life. And they've done a good job of giving him some nuance. But yeah, I agree. Like, why not? Why not Terry Silver being just the big bad of the rest of the series?
yeah,
I
yeah. I
mean,
think you nailed it when you said the nuances. I was thinking the exact same thing. Like there's nuance to him, but it doesn't make him like too sympathetic or something
right,
like that. You can understand his motivations more, I think,
right.
but you still know, okay, this dude's just trying to wreck some stuff, and I kind of like that. I hope he stays that way.
Right. And Kenan says the very premise of the sitcom The Goldbergs explores this very topic so well in each episode without being in the face a walk down memory lane. I'll confess, I really haven't seen The
I
Goldbergs. I've
haven't
seen a
either.
few episodes, but yeah, you haven't seen them either. Maybe we should check that
No.
out. Maybe
I've heard very good things about it, but I haven't watched it myself. So I'll definitely have to check that out if that's true. That sounds awesome.
right. Peter says, same cloth, Drew. I've seen all the American Pies, even the spin-offs. That's great. Stuart
American Pie
says,
2,
oh,
that's my favorite.
American Pie too. Yes, yes. Emu Billy says, hey guys, hope you're having a good Saturday. Great to see you, Emu Billy. Thank you guys for all your comments. Thank you for your super chats. Appreciate that, you guys. Thanks for supporting the channel. The greatest underrated teen movie of the 80s was 3 O'Clock High. Best John Hughes movie he never did. That's great. I'll have to check that out. Here's another one. License to Drive is great. Underrated 80s movie. Very funny. They were all, it seemed like every week there was another one of these types of movies. Just like, that was just like almost a crazy premise. But it's like sort of a teen focused comedy. I don't know. They just don't do that anymore.
No, they don't. They really don't. And I mean, I'm going to get that tattooed on my forehead. They don't make them like they used to.
Well, okay. So you kind of brought up Terry Silver and the villains, because we talked about how everything was very epic about the 80s. They didn't mind going 100%. And that was true with the villains. So we talked a little bit about like villains being bad just to be bad, but what other 80s characteristics would you say the villains had? Because I want to point out that you do explore these in the Last Row podcast. Hey, guys, if you missed it before, this is the Terry Silver trading card Last Row podcast that Drew and Badway came up with. So obviously you have a villain scale. And I think this villain scale works very well, especially with 80s villains. So what's going on with 80s villains?
Yeah, I mean, they're simple. A lot of them just want to take over. They just want to take over and they just want to win. And I think Terry Silver is the perfect example of that. We've talked about this at length before. He takes time off of being the CEO of a major national corporation to go terrorize a teenager. And I know that they've said stuff about him being on cocaine and all this stuff recently, but I'll go back to when I didn't know that, and I'll enjoy that the fact that he was like, you know what, he's just helping his friend out. And I think some of these like crazy decisions that he made and things that he did, like pretending to have a beater pickup truck, and
Right.
it works, right?
Right.
Nice truck, Mr. Silver. I think that there's a reason for that. And I think there's a lot to be said for the simplicity of their plots and the fact that they just want to dominate. And
Right.
and I think there was a really good comment in here about wrestling. And I think
Yes.
that's a great other point about like wrestling in the 80s and 90s, like these heels, like it's the same thing. And
Right.
it's such a good it's
Right.
such a good comment, Kendon, because I think there's a lot of parallels with that. And you know, it's just a really, really great comment. It stood out to me when I saw it in the chat here. But
Yeah. Kendon, thank you for these amazing comments, guys. Kendon, we're very lucky. He's like one of the great improvisational comedians. That he says the bad villains are just being bad is what made 80s professional wrestling so huge and drew people into those storylines. Yeah, it's fake, but people were so drawn in by these larger than life heroes and villains. Yeah, larger than life. You know, there's just something great about that. And to your point about Terry Silver, you know, and I've said this before, and I think something unique about him, and guys, I think this is why he could be one of the greatest villains of all time, is because he has everything. He has pretty much conquered the world. He is doing deals, toxic waste. He's bribing officials. He has all the money he needs. He is conquering the world in the way that 80s villains want to conquer the world, or they're trying to. It's about world domination. But he gives it up to go after a teenager and an old man just for the fun of it, just because his friend suggested it. He puts all that world domination aside just to torment a teenager and an old man. Like that is a whole new level of villain, I think.
And you know why? Because he can. And that
Right.
it's because he can or could, whatever, right? Just because he could. And I mean, there's something to be said for that. And you can't do that in a show now. So I know that they have to give him nuance and all this stuff, but it doesn't really work like that anymore. And I think that's what makes some of these so great. There was another comment in here about, I think it was around on Chong Li and Tong Po. Like, yes, absolutely. Kickboxer and Bloodsport are two of my favorite movies. And even Drago, right? You guys were talking about Rocky last week when you were talking to Strife.
Right.
I mean, those are quintessential 80s villains. Like Chong Li, right? He's just unbeatable guy in this kumite. And he's just, I mean, it's like killing people in the tournament. And he's just a tough guy. Van Damme's got to beat him. And, you know, he does. He throws sand in his eyes and all this, whatever else he's doing. It's crazy. I mean, these are these are classic movies for a reason, and these people live the test of time. When you think about 80s villains, these people all pop up in my head, and it's hard not to you almost like root for the villain in some ways because they're so
Yes.
badass, right? You have it on the thumbnail, but badass is one way Johnny would say it. It's true. There's a
Right.
reason.
Absolutely. Peter says the biggest tell that you're a bad guy is that there has to be a moment when they tilt their head so far downwards where they're basically looking through their eyebrows and says something ominous. Yeah. Yeah.
I love
I
it.
love it. That's great. Emo Billy says, Drew, are those cards a real thing? That would be really cool.
I might have to call a lawyer, Emu, because I don't know if I'll get sued for making those, but I really would love to print them out. And we mentioned in the beginning of the show, I don't know if you heard, but I'm gonna try to do them for all the other villains that we've done. I've got a template, so they're coming. If you check our social channels at the Last Row Pod on Instagram, at the Last Row Pod on Twitter, we're gonna tweet all of them out and we'll make them a thing going forward. And maybe I'll do some actual printings and open some packs on one of the live streams coming up.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that I can't wait, man. I keep me updated. We all need to follow that for sure. Wild Man, thank you so much for supporting the channel. Since these two shows have a rivalry, how about Stranger Things and Cobra Kai have a crossover, but an alternate animated off-canon film, so it won't mess up the continuity of the two shows? Who is the villain? Vecna?
Vecna.
Yeah, and versus Terry Silver. That'd be
Man.
amazing.
We'd have to put Vecna on the villain scale. We'll see who wins. I don't know. Getting Terry might give him a run for his money. I gotta say, Terry's cunning. He's smart.
Absolutely. And a crossover that other people have talked about is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Cobra Kai, and that's fascinating to me.
They have the figures, yeah. At my local
Yeah.
comic book shop, they have the figures of. It's like I think there's a John Kreese versus Donatello action figure set and stuff, and it's pretty cool. And they're doing more crossovers with that and Power Rangers now, which is another big '90s nostalgia thing that we recently talked about. But I like the crossovers. I like the idea of that.
Right. Aurelio says, while you guys are correct that many 80s plots are simple, the 80s wasn't afraid to go big. Rocky Balboa ended the Cold War. Right. And that's what we talk about, like the epicness of these 80s movies. And to be fair, you know, I could see by the end of the 80s, maybe people were tired of the same style of storytelling. I get that. Like, maybe we should have a little more nuance. Maybe things aren't so black and white. Maybe things aren't that cheesy. But I'm kind of surprised that we haven't gone back. I know we're referencing the 80s a lot, but it seems like a lot of new movies that come out are still extremely somber. And I wish there was a bit more fun. Maybe Top Gun Maverick is sort of a return to that.
Yeah.
I wish there were a few more mixed in that had that sense of like fun and over the top, you know, just things that aren't quite realistic, heightened reality.
I'm trying to think of some of the other more recent movies. Like there's a movie from, I think it's 2010. It was with Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. It was called Faster. And that movie was sort of like very simple, like a very simple sort of revenge plot or whatever. And then I'm thinking about like Drive Angry with Nicolas Cage. And these are more action movies. Whereas you go Wick, like Wick is simple, but it's kind of all over the place. But I think, and I love John Wick, by the way. It's some of my favorite of the most recent movies. I love Keanu Reeves. Speaking of 80s, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Bogus Journey, 2 awesome movies. But I'm thinking about some of these more recent ones, and even like Taken. Taken is sort of a somewhat of a throwback. You've got Liam Neeson just trying to get his daughter back, and it's pretty simple. Or The Equalizer, starring Denzel Washington. And I think, but again, it doesn't have the same feel. It tries to do it, and I think it does it well. There's another movie with Bob Odenkirk recently. I'm blanking on the name, but it's a very simple movie like that, and it was very good. But it just doesn't have the same like lasting power as some of these. Like I'll watch them, I enjoy it, and then I kind of move on. Whereas some of these other ones, you just keep going back to them. And I don't know, it might be the personalities, might be the actors, might be the plots. I don't know what it is. It's just, I'm a junkie for it. What can I say?
I know, me too. It's great stuff. Wild Man, thanks guys for supporting the channel with super chats. Cobra Kai represents martial arts movies of the 80s, especially ninja movies. Martial arts in cinema is slowly making a comeback. Thanks to Cobra Kai, we need more. And this is a great point too, because in the 80s, in that era, like you could base an entire movie on the idea of martial arts action, you know, or even like gun action. You know, it was just, that was what the movie was sold on. And, you know, we had a lot of direct to video movies that were sold on that too. But what do you think? Do you think that that's kind of gone away a bit? Do you think we're primed for that to return, like just martial arts action?
I think so. I mean, we mentioned John Wick quite a bit, and that's got
Yes.
like gunplay, but it's also martial arts as well. And I think some of these movies, like I don't know if you've ever watched The Raid or some of the Indonesian action movies, The Raid 2, some of the Gareth Evans films. Those are really good, and they've got some awesome martial arts in them. And it's not so much the traditional martial arts in like a tournament or something, but it's done well. And I think that it adds some fantastical elements as well, if you if you want to say it that way. But some of
Right.
those are really fun. And there's a movie with Christian Bale back in the day. It was called what the heck was this called? Now I'm blanking. Oh man, Equilibrium. And it was
Yes.
like gun
Yes.
kata,
Yep.
and that had some martial arts in it too. I know it's a little bit older, but there's some cool aspects of that. So I think that there's some truth to that too. I think that it's coming back into films, maybe not in the same way that it was in the 80s, but I think it's being embedded into it and hopefully continues to, because I like it.
Yes. Thank you guys for all your great comments. We're trying to get to as many as we can. Terry says Terry Silver and Vecna would probably join forces.
I agree.
Probably so. Badway says, can Terry Silver beat 11?
She's a teenager, so sure.
Absolutely. Terry would love tormenting 11. And I mean, look at this last season, the character of Papa,
Yeah.
I mean, wow. Terry Silver would probably just be laughing at that character. And how he did it. Now, it's
He'd
Terry
be on his payroll.
Yeah. Wildman says Terry Silver's the Vecna of Cobra Kai. Yeah, he really is. If Terry had magical abilities, maybe, but otherwise he wouldn't stand a chance against 11. But the thing is, 11's a kid, and Terry Silver's all about mental control.
Yeah.
So he would manipulate 11.
Right up his alley.
Yes, totally in his wheelhouse. Yeah, and Jay says that too. Terry manipulates 11. Technically, she could beat him, but she wouldn't unless Terry was attacking her friends, and he would know better. Terry wins 9 out of 10 times.
Agree.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I 100% agree. Stuart brings up the Bat franchise. Batgirl was filmed just along the road, and now it's shelved for being as bad as Karate. Thank you so much, Stuart. I appreciate
That's awesome.
that. Guys, he is referencing, I did a video called Is Sato Really Bad at Karate? And check it out. I think it's fun. I think I bring up some good points.
You
but
do.
What do you think's going on, Drew? Because we're talking about the 80s. Batgirl also featured, not only would it be a new franchise, but it featured a return of Michael Keaton as Batman. He was Tim Burton's 89 Batman movie, and they just threw it in the trash. They just shelved the movie and it was done. And what is going on?
I don't know, man. And I'm on the record of being, I'm a huge DC Comics fan, right? Whether the movies are good or not, you can debate that, but I'm a huge fan of the characters from DC Comics. I've got on my wall over here, I've got a whole bunch of Batman comics and stuff. Batman is one of my favorite characters. I'll tell you this, I wasn't necessarily down with having like a geriatric Batman being the main Batman of the universe. Like, I actually really like the new Batman. I know it's sort of disconnected from the main extended universe, but it's kind of weird where they would just throw this away. I don't know. You've got the new Discovery Warner Media, whatever the heck it's called these days. It sounds like they're going to reboot everything. All I want is another Henry Cavill Superman movie. Please just give me that. Like, he loves playing the character. Henry, if you're out there, we love you. You're the best actor. Like, I love him and The Witcher and all this stuff. I just want another Superman movie where he gets to actually be Superman.
Hey, you know something? That's another franchise that I think of.
Yeah.
I know the first one was in 78, but 2, 3, 4, the Christopher Reeve era was mostly in the 80s.
Yep.
And that was an era that really matched that. And there was something you could say maybe corny about them or whatever, but I mean, the sincerity of Superman, and I wish Henry Cavill could be Superman in a movie more like that.
Yes.
Like, not so dark and depressing and cynical and all that stuff. Like, just pure Superman. Like, that puts a smile on your face. The whole movie puts a smile on your face.
Yeah,
and I'd love to see him do that.
And that's the kind of character he wants to play. Like, he's been on the record of saying he wants to be that character. I mean, I think the movie that it came out, like Superman Returns or whatever it was, it tried to be like an extension of the Donnerverse and all that, and it wasn't really received well. I enjoyed it. I mean, it was kind of boring a little bit, but I still enjoyed it. But I like Henry Cavill as an actor. I think he's awesome, and he's a fan of all the source materials too, right? Like, he knows what he's talking about when he's talking about The Witcher. Like, he builds computers. Like he's one of us, right? He's one of the geeks. He likes all of this stuff, and I think he really likes the character. And why wouldn't you want to have someone that loves what they're doing, and it's not just a paycheck to him? And I wish that they would just open up the checkbook and give him another sequel here, or just do something. I don't know. I want him to come back. I'm a fan.
Yeah, I think he's really good. He's a really good Superman. Jason says it's nice hearing others who appreciate the magic of the 80s, the simplicity, sincerity, all that. It's such a comfort chat. Well, great. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
You know, thank you for watching, Jason. Terry Johnson says, still say Bad is the perfect song for Terry Silver. Now I can't unsee him on that video. Man, that would be great. Oh, I'd love to see
Ken,
Terry.
now you have a new project that you got to do now.
Oh my gosh.
Edit that in.
No kidding. Man, how great is that idea? That's wonderful. We were talking about, this is kind of getting to a Cobra Kai connection with the cancellation of the Batgirl movie. I'm worried about Blue Beetle, which Xolo, who plays Miguel, is the star of that. Like, this was going to be his kind of DC breakout, and man, are they going to shelve that?
I hope not, because I'm excited about that. It actually looks interesting. Blue Beetle's a cool character too, and I was excited about Xolo playing him. You know, it'd be kind of interesting. So I would love to see how he would do that, because I haven't seen him in many things outside of Cobra Kai. He's a good actor, and I think it would be great to see him in something. And I hope it doesn't get canceled, but it might. It really might.
Right. I hope not. Mario, I'm watching Karate Kid 2. That's great. Peter Vonasak from Cobra Kai Companion will be talking about Karate Kid 2 in the near future. So keep it posted here. Robana says, I want to see Silver and Amanda square off. That would be fun, and it may just happen. Kate says, your psychoanalysis of the Karate Kid characters is spot on. Thank you. Thank you so much. Jesse Cofan says, Drew, do you watch any show on the Arrowverse?
I used to, and I was a huge fan of the first couple seasons. Deathstroke is one of my favorite characters, especially Manu Bennett, the actor who played him was phenomenal. That was like movie level acting on the CW show. He's incredible. And I kind of fell off after it became more CW teen drama-esque. And I like The Flash, but I've fallen off since. It's hard to find the time, but I did enjoy what I saw back in the day.
Right. And I haven't seen those shows, so I might have to check them out.
The first couple of seasons are good.
Okay, cool. Definitely. I'll check them out. Wildman says Daniel can be a better papa to 11, teaching her about balance. Absolutely. I'd love to see that interaction. Thank you again for the super chat. Well, Drew, so okay, if we're going to sum up kind of what we've learned today, we talked about what made the 80s distinctive, like the style of it, just the epicness of it, right? The music, the villains, and a lot of people, I think, like the comments said, find comfort in our discussion today. So what do you think going forward we should take away from our discussion today when we look at the 80s and we look at all of these shows and movies that are referencing the 80s?
I think a lot of comments referenced the simplicity, the sincerity, and I think just they weren't trying to be anything that they weren't. And I think there's something to be said for that. And I think there's a feel and a vibe that you get when you turn on a movie like Bloodsport, or you turn on a movie like The Breakfast Club. It takes you back in almost in a time machine in a way. And there's something so comforting about that. And just like some folks said, this chat is comforting. Well, I'm enjoying all the comments that are coming in too. It's amazing with some of the interaction and all the stuff that everyone's saying. I know we didn't get a chance to get to everybody here, but everything, I'm reading everything that comes along, and I agree with like everything that's coming in here. There's just some feel that you have when you watch these things. And I think a big part of it is, you know, I'm a huge Terry Silver fan. I'm a huge sort of villain fan of any movie. I want a movie with a big bad villain that's just kind of over the top, cheesy. You add that cheesiness on top, the cheese factor, and I think you've got yourself a perfection. I'm thinking about the meme of what is it? The Steve Jobs meme, perfection. Like that's what I think about when I think of some of these and that epic scale. So I'm so excited that so many other people appreciate this stuff like we do here, and it's awesome to connect with everybody. It's been a great chat.
I agree. This has been so much fun, Drew, just talking with you about this, and it's so much fun to hear everyone's thoughts on this. And I'm glad that, you know, we're obviously not alone. You know, we all love it. And I'd like to put this challenge out to people who are making content, movies, TV shows, everything. Is I think maybe with everything we've been through in the world lately, I think we've had multiple decades where everything's been very somber. Like a lot of our movies are darker and, more dour. And I think there's a place for that. But I hope that we can get back to some of the fun and sincerity and the larger than life aspects of stories that we saw in the 80s. And I think our culture's ready for it. I think we jump on it. I
Yeah.
think we want to have fun and we want to escape and have fun, again. I
Yeah.
don't know.
I can't argue with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Drew, thank you so much for joining us today. Guys, if you haven't seen Drew, if you haven't heard Drew's Last Row podcast with Badway, he was on the chat today. Check it out. You guys just do all kinds of movies. The latest one was The Butterfly Effect.
Butterfly Effect, another weird 2004 movie that we probably, it's not super nostalgic, but it's a fun movie to talk about. But yeah, that was our most recent episode. It's episode 111. If you want to check it out, check us out on I say iTunes all the time. It's Apple Podcasts these days. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to a podcast, we're likely on there. And our website's thelastropodcast.com. If you're looking for all the links, just check it out. Really appreciate everyone that's jumped and listened to our show from being on the streams here. I know we've gotten some interaction. Thanks to everyone that checked our show out. If you like the stuff we talk about here today, this is the kind of stuff we're talking about there. So definitely, feel free to check us out. And thanks for giving us a plug, Ken, and giving us a chance to have me on here.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll ask you one more question. After our discussion today about the 80s, do you have a favorite episode of Last Row Podcast that deals with an 80s movie that people should check out?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm going to say I love our Karate Kid 3 episode. It's very nostalgic to me, but it's kind of dated at this point because it was from 2015 before Cobra Kai existed. But maybe check out our Roadhouse episode. It's one of the old ones. It's a very old one. And we've done a lot of like Schwarzenegger films too. So we've done a lot of those too. I like our Terminator one as well. Oh, I know you asked me one, but I'm rattling off like 50 here.
That's wonderful. Everyone check it out. Seriously, you haven't listened to Last Row, check out some of these episodes. They're great. Thank you guys. Stuart says best stream to date.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
Terry
much.
Johnson, loving the stream. Such a comfort. Wow. Thank you. Peter, great KenCast as always. Thank you. Kate, thank you. I love these chats so much that I took an extra shift so I could be awake and join in. Thanks so much, Kate. That means so much. Jason, thank you, Ken and Drew. Awesome conversation. Badway says Bloodsport.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's another of my favorites.
So that's an episode of Last Row Podcast. So Badway, the other co-host, says, check out Bloodsport. Terry says, thank you both so much. Kendon, great discussion. Thank you, Kendon. We might have to get you on one of these here pretty soon if you want to. Thank you guys. And keep it here. We're going to be sure to subscribe to this channel. We're going to have a lot of stuff coming out very soon. A lot of videos, a lot of live streams. There's going to be a lot of news about Cobra Kai. If there's other things that you want to talk about, like this 80s discussion, which it's been amazing getting your response to that, let us know. Put a comment below this video, and not just in the live chat, but in like the permanent comments to this video of other topics that you might like to see us talk about. And Drew, thanks for coming on, and I look forward to having you back again real soon.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks to everyone in the chat. It's so good to talk to you all. It's a pleasure to be on the stream. And thanks again so much. I love doing this. So anytime you need someone to chat, you let me know. I'm here.
Absolutely. And thank you guys. Thank you for subscribing, liking this video. And thank you for your super chats. Everything helps this channel. And we look forward to seeing you next time on KenCast.